how many of you have heard of Where's Waldo? All right, well, for those of you who haven't, it's a series of books and video games consisting of busy scenes like this one that contain Waldo, and it's your job to find him. So what do you need to know to find Waldo? Okay, you need to know what he looks like. Okay, a template to visually run through an image until you find a match. Well, this is pretty easy in the scene you saw before, but what about when you get busier and busier scenes like this one here? In this case, you can see the value of maybe writing a computer program that would digitize the likeness of Waldo and scan it through the picture to find matches. Such programs exist, and they're widely used for many applications. So today, I want to tell you how I've used this method of template matching in my research to learn something about the motion of faults and glaciers, and how I've engaged high school students in research using template matching and Python programming. But before I get to that, let me just say a little bit more about template matching. You start with a digital image of your template, and you run it through the bigger picture, and you compute correlations pixel by pixel. And if the correlation exceeds a defined threshold, you have a match. So here's an example where the template's drawn from the bigger image. So when you scan it through the larger picture, you'll get a perfect correlation when it finds itself, and high correlation when it finds similar images or daisies. Okay, so how does this work with seismic data? So here are some seismic signals from many stations with the templates identified in the red, and these templates are then run through continuous data for each station, and cross-correlation coefficients are computed. And when the network cross-correlation coefficient exceeds a set threshold, a match is declared. So last summer, I taught an earthquake class in the Cosmos program, which is a residential 4-week summer program for high-achieving high school students interested in math and science. Here they are here. And I involved them in a research project using template matching. So the project was looking for repeating earthquakes in the shallow portion of the southern Cascadia subduction zone that might indicate that slow slip events were occurring here, okay? So that repeating little earthquakes might have been driven by slow slip. So I gave the students seismic data from 4 earthquakes that I identified as occurring on the plate interface. Okay, and those 4 earthquakes are shown here in the boxes. And I had them run the waveforms through continuous data from the Cascadia Initiative, both land and OBS stations. And this next plot's going to show the network correlation coefficients for each of those 4 earthquakes as a function of time. And you can see that time period in between the red vertical lines in March 2015, there seems to be a lot of repeating. These 4 repeating earthquakes seem to repeat a lot that might be driven by slow slip. So the students looked at the GPS data from the closest PBO station and found evidence for a possible strain transient at this time. They also checked the Cascadia Tremor catalog and found down dip tremor. Their repeating earthquakes were up dip, but it may indicate that there's up dip tremor near slow slip. So I'm continuing to work with 5 of these students that are shown here to actually create a catalog of earthquakes to identify those that are on the plate interface, find more templates, potentially find more slip events. But in my own research, I've used template matching to identify repeating earthquakes and tremor associated with a slow slip event in the Hikurangi margin in New Zealand. We found that both earthquakes and tremor have peak activity at the end and after the slow slip event, and the activity is spatially concentrated where the seamounts are being subducted. And our interpretation is that slow slip accelerates deformation caused by the seamounts plowing into the upper plate, with both the earthquakes and the tremor occurring on a complex fracture network surrounding the seamounts. I've also used template matching to identify thousands of small earthquakes that occur at the base of Willand's ice stream in Antarctica during its once to twice daily slip events. And we use template matching to identify families of repeating earthquakes and locate them. And these families aren't randomly distributed, but instead they define a linear streaks that are parallel to ice motion. And our interpretation here is that basal earthquakes occur where deformable till is thinned and stiff higher basal traction material is exposed. Finally, I've used template matching to reveal a reduction in earthquake stress drop following a large megathrust event in Costa Rica. These plots show the temporal behavior of several repeating families that occur both before and after the magnitude 7.6 Nicoya earthquake indicated by the red lines. And we determined stress drops for the larger repeating earthquakes and find a really dramatic decrease in earthquake stress drop following the Nicoya earthquake. And this, we think, reflects weakening of the plate interface after the main shock, followed by a period of stress recovery that matches the after-slip period.